Last week, I was chairing a Model UN committee in Sydney, and there were 200 delegates all over from Australia, so passionately debating and passing resolutions, and there were POIs flying across the room. But I had this one question: what happens once that resolution leaves the room? Honestly, nothing. Just like the United Nations, even in Model UN, a resolution is only as powerful as the people who decide to enforce it. Genuinely, United Nations is one of the most important international organizations on the earth. It has 193 member states, and every year it has $3.72 billion as its annual budget allocation, and it has tens of thousands of peacekeepers deployed across all the 11 operation zones. And yet, right now, in Ukraine, in Sudan, in Gaza, the UN is watching. It's passing resolutions, issuing statements, and holding emergency sessions. But no country decides to follow the resolutions that the UN passes. Why? Why is that? Why is it that all countries put their national obligations above the international obligation that is put forward by the United Nations? Why does an organization built to prevent wars always fail at stopping wars? And the most important question of all, is UN actually broken, or was it actually designed in a way that it was never meant to work in the first place? That is what this video is going to be about. Hang around till the end to know the answer for this question. To understand why the UN fails, it's important to understand why the UN was built in the first place and what it was meant to do. So it was the year 1945 and the World War II just ended, and there were 75 to 80 million people who were dead. The whole cities were leveled, and the world leaders joined together in San Francisco on 26th of June 1945 and asked one question: how do we ensure that this tragedy does not happen once again? And the answer was the United Nations. So initially there were 51 members who joined together and signed the UN Charter in San Francisco on 26th of June 1945. Today there are 193 countries which are part of the United Nations. There are only 2 countries which are not part of the United Nations, which is the Vatican City and the State of Palestine. And there are 6 main bodies which are important in the UN, and the 2 that matters for most of the conversation is the General Assembly and the Security Council. So the General Assembly has 193 members, each one of them have 1 vote. But here's the catch: the resolutions passed in General Assembly are not legally binding, which means they're just recommendations by the UN. They're just moral pressure and nothing more. The Security Council has the most power out of all the other bodies. So this is where the real power actually lies. The Security Council has 15 member states, out of which 5 of them are permanent members, and the 10 others are rotating. They keep rotating every 2 years. So the P5, the permanent members, are the United States, Russia, China, the UK, and the France. These 5 countries have a power that none of the countries in the world has, which is the veto power. If the Security Council passes a resolution, and if one of the 5 countries does not agree to the resolution and passes a veto, then the whole resolution would not pass, even though that resolution was meant for a public good. This design, which was built in 1945, is still running the world in 2026, and I'm about to show you that this is the single most critical point which makes the UN to fail. Let me give you the veto in raw numbers in order to make you understand what effect the veto has on all the resolutions. So as of the last September 2025 alone, the US passed 89 vetoes, out of which 51 was to protect Israel. The Soviet Union and Russia passed 129 vetoes. The China passed 29 vetoes. The UK passed 19 vetoes, and the France passed 16 vetoes. In 2024 alone, 7 draft resolutions failed because of vetoes. Just look at the numbers. They're crazy. Latvia's ambassador to the UN said the veto, which was originally envisioned as a safeguard to the peace, has too often become a barrier for collective action. Malaysia's representative went even further, calling the veto power outdated, undemocratic, and not complying with the principle of sovereign equality to all the member states. In Gaza, the Security Council was able to pass a ceasefire resolution only after 171 days into the conflict, and the US vetoed 4 times before the resolution even passed. But by the end of the time the 2728th resolution was passed on March 2024, there were 10,000 people who were already dead. And the Israel's immediate response was to say that they are going to ignore the resolution completely, secure in the fact that they are backed by the United States, who can safeguard them from all the consequences. In Ukraine, Russia invaded a sovereign member state and Russia sat in the council judging the invasion itself. Russia was the country invading Ukraine, but Russia was also the member of the council judging its own invasion. So it vetoed all the resolutions that was passed against itself. This is a complete flaw in the system itself. This is so biased. The architects of the UN deliberately gave the most power to the most powerful countries to protect themselves because they knew that without doing this, these member states like US or China or Russia would not even consider joining the UN. The UN was not designed to constrain great powers. Instead, it was designed to give great powers the power to make them cooperate with everyone. In every model UN committee that I have facilitated, each and every member state has the equal rights, be it from a delegate who is from a small island or a delegate from a G20 nation. Everyone has the same procedural rights, but that's not the case in the Security Council. Africa is the continent that is mostly debated in all the Security Council debates, but ironically they don't even have any veto power, no structural power and no proper representation. They have 54 nations and 1.4 billion people, but no representation in an organization like United Nations. Angola's representative calls this an historical injustice made to all the African countries. And I actually quite agree to that. Why is it that white-skinned countries are having more representation in the UN than the black-skinned countries? So let's say the Security Council resolution does pass. Let's say there is no veto that is used on the resolution. The resolution actually exists and is legally binding under the UN Charter. But what if a country doesn't actually comply? The answer that nobody wants to say out loud is that probably nothing. The United Nations can't do anything about it because it doesn't have any police force. It doesn't have any enforcement body of its own as well. Every single consequence that the UN imposes, be it trade embargoes or military action or even sanctions, it completely depends upon the member country which is volunteering to enact it. But here's the truth, that most of the member states, they put their own national interests above all the international obligations that they signed over paper 80 years ago. Here is a phrase that has defined international affairs for over 2,400 years now. That is, the strong do what they will and the weak do what they must. Look at the track record. The international relations scholar Stephen Jones found that the resolutions that were passed against the United States and the allies of the United States represent by far the largest amount of resolutions that did not pass. Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022 and the General Assembly passed the resolution ES 11/1 deploring Russia's actions, but Russia ignored it completely, knowing that the UN cannot do anything about that. And Israel has continuously rejected all the resolutions passed by Security Council and the General Assembly about all the ceasefire obligations because Israel knows that it is being backed by the US and all the consequences will not affect it. The pattern is very clear. The UN actually works when the powerful countries want it to work, and it fails when the powerful countries don't want it to work. The Operation Desert Storm in 1990, backed by the UN coalition which expelled the Iraq in Kuwait, actually worked because the US and its allies wanted it to work. But whereas if you see on the other hand, the Rwanda genocide in 1994 where 800,000 people were killed in 100 days, it was not stopped because no powerful nations had any strategic interest in stopping the war. This is the brutal, honest logic of the international system. The UN has moral authority, UN has legitimacy, but what it does not have is power. Let me give you 5 clearest examples of UN failure. It did not happen in ancient history, it happened in the past 30 years. Firstly, the Rwanda in 1994. 800,000 people were killed in 100 days and the UN peacekeepers were on the ground, but they were ordered not to intervene. Secondly, the Bosnia in 1995. 8,000 men and boys were massacred. They were Dutch UN peacekeepers on the ground, but they were powerless. They were not able to do anything about that. But ironically, that area was considered as safe zone by the United Nations, but it was not safe. Thirdly, Syria since the 2011 till the present date, 500,000 people were killed in the civil war and it had the most amount of refugees in the modern day. Yet, when the United Nations passed resolutions in Security Council, the US and China passed 16 vetoes during the years 2011 till 2022. and no resolutions were passed by United Nations for this cause. Fourthly, the war in Gaza. When the Security Council had made the resolution for ceasefire, the US vetoed several times and the resolution was not even passed. And when the resolution was finally passed, the 2728th resolution, after 171 days, the Israel completely ignored it, completely denied it. Fifthly, Sudan. From 2023 till present date, thousands of people are killed, the worst humanitarian crisis ever on earth. And Russia vetoed several times in the late 2024 against the protection of the civilians of Sudan. 5 conflicts, 5 failures, and the same structural reason every single time. A world body that requires the cooperation of the very powers which decides to enforce the outcomes which would directly impact these powerful nations. And hence, these resolutions are not being passed. Now, I want to be honest with you. I want to be intellectually honest with you, because there are a lot of things that UN does which protects the world. Smallpox, one of the world's deadliest diseases, was completely eradicated by the coordinated action of WHO. Similarly, UNICEF helped eradicate polio since 1988 to 99% through vaccination to all the children. And the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, brokered by the UN framework, has helped reduce the spread of nuclear weapons for over 50 years now. And also, the Paris Agreement, even though it has its own limitations, has reduced the carbon footprint. The UN peacekeeping organizations, despite its limitations, has helped contain conflicts in regions like East Timor, Cambodia. The US greatest strength is not enforcement, it's coordination and norm setting. It's giving the world a standard language to talk about rights, standards, and obligations. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the UN in 1948, is one of the critical documents that is now replicated in almost many of the countries now, serving as the primary document of human rights in all the other countries. And being part of the United Nations Association of Australia and the UN Youth Australia allows me firsthand to see what happens when decision making is given in the hands of young people. They tend to see from the shoes of other people. They're not like world leaders who just tend to care about their nations. I see different perspectives inside the model United Nations. The delegates don't just argue for their country, but also argue for the collective good of all the other countries. I wish that could happen amongst the world leaders as well. So last year in 2025, the Secretary General came up with a very crucial initiative, which was the UN80 initiative. So they had 4 reforms which was written in that UN80 initiative. Firstly, the veto reform. Secondly, the expansion of the Security Council to include more permanent members. Thirdly, a more stronger General Assembly which would have binding resolutions. And fourthly, inclusion of the youth and civil society organizations. But genuinely, for all of this to work, all the P5 countries should agree to that, especially the veto reform. Already the US and China are not showing any appetite to losing the veto power from their hands, and I'm pretty sure they wouldn't agree to this as well. But without their agreement, this could not happen, which is a flaw in the system itself. I would say the way it was built itself was like these powerful countries have the power to decide who gets what power. So let's tackle the question, is UN actually broken? I mean, it's not completely broken in essence, but what it wants is structural reform. The UN was actually built for the post-World War II situation, which is completely irrelevant to this day and age. We're sitting in the 21st century where the global geopolitical realm has completely changed. There are a lot of other countries which plays a dominant role in the geopolitical realm other than the P5 countries which has permanent membership in the Security Council, right? So all the countries should get the opportunity for sovereign equality in the United Nations. And for this to happen, all the countries should cooperate together for the reform of the UN, firstly. Secondly, all the diplomats should agree to this. And third and most importantly, all the young change makers should voice out for the reform of the United Nations. If you found this video truly helpful, and if this video made you think more about the role of the international organizations, then share it with a friend who also likes these kind of topics, and subscribe so every week you don't miss the videos that I make on geopolitics and international relations. I'll see you in the next one.